All right, welcome to the screen recording. Today we're going to have a look at Adobe Illustrator and specifically at creating isometric illustrations. Now, I've got a few examples here of isometric illustrations that we can have a quick look at. A lot of them are done for corporate illustration purposes, along with designing up for information, and also they are a lot of fun as well. So they're very clean, lined, they show a lot of detail, and they also actually have quite a few assets which work out really well for us. And the reason for that is once we start actually creating isometric illustrations, we can actually repeat them very easily. And one of the key things you'll notice with isometric is typically we're only ever going to see the top, left, and right sides of a shape. The other thing to notice is that isometric does not follow true perspective. It doesn't disappear to a vanishing point as would an actual proper illustration. And this is advantageous stylistically for us because no matter where we place objects that are isometrically created, they are going to maintain their correct perspective because they disobey the laws in a sense. So when we create something, we can scale it, place it as many times as we want, in as many locations as we want, and it's still going to feel in place. So it's very, very handy like that. And the ability to create assets and get a good asset library going is extremely valuable, and you can very quickly populate an environment once you have some of these set up. So to start, we're going to jump into Adobe Illustrator, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a new document. So File, New. I'm simply going to select A4. Now this will be in print as well, and I'm going to set my orientation to landscape and create. And there we have our simple A4 page. Now the cool thing with Illustrator is because it is mostly vector based, we don't have to worry too much about making sure our pixels are of this particular resolution because they can be scaled up indefinitely. Now, in order to help out with this, I'm also going to start looking at creating this using some sort of plan or schematic. Now, ordinarily, I'd recommend sketching this out using an isometric grid on a bit of paper, but our other option is as well to use schematics. I'm going to use this one here of R2D2, and I'll bring that into my Illustrator document. Now, it's also important to try and get actual photo references if you are trying to create something that's realistic, so you can go in and check some of the detail, because quite often when you're looking at a plan or schematic, it doesn't quite give as much information and textures and stuff that you might need. So, and with a lot of the stuff, we do want to try and keep it fairly relevant to the original, but we also need to take some artistic liberties for that. We go ahead and scale this down. I'm going to place this in my document, and I'm not going to take up the whole page because I do want some white area here for me to place. Now, in Illustrator, you can have this off your artboard, so that's an option there, but I'm going to just put it there for now. Now, this workspace here is set up to Essentials. We can go to Window, Workspace, Essentials, and you can hit Reset Essentials if you want to bring that back up. It's going to pop up with some libraries that I already have created. And of course, we can flip that off and close that. Now, we do have some shortcuts here. I can bring up my layers at this point, or I can go to Window and click on Layers and bring that up. And here are my layers. So here's my layer that I've created. It's simply just got the image of R2 that I've brought in here. And at this point, we might want to select this. You can use your direct selection tool or select tool, shortcut is V, or you can select from here in our layers panel or our object. We want this selected, and you may wish at this point to drop the opacity of this. Basically, the only reason we may want to do this is if the line work itself is very stark, and if we're going to be drawing lines over this, we don't want them to get confused. This one's slightly grayed out, so it should be fine at 100%. I'm not going to get too lost with that. And once I'm done with that, I'm simply going to lock that layer so I don't accidentally select on it. We go ahead and create a new layer. And you can rename this if you want. I'm just going to go ahead and just continue with my build at this point. And I'm going to show you a couple of situations on how isometric actually works. And for doing this, I'm going to create a rectangle tool. And shortcut for this is the letter M. For doing circles and ellipses, the shortcut is L. Notice in Photoshop, M is for both rectangle and ellipse. In Photoshop, the shortcut is L and M. And I bring that up because these are two of the tools that we are mainly going to use. I'm going to click and drag, and as I'm dragging, I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to create a perfect square. With that still selected, I can drop in and change the color of that. I can also change the color of the stroke and also the width of the stroke there, but I'm going to stick with black as the color of the stroke and 1 point as the width of it. So nice and simple. I'm then going to duplicate this. Now, there's a few ways of doing this. We can go to our selection tool, again, shortcut V, make sure we're selected on there, and you can go to Object, sorry, go to Edit, and you can go to Paste in Front, or Control F, paste in back, Control B, and it's going to paste it behind the object, or paste it in place, Shift, Control V, and you've also got to paste in the outwards. So Control C, Control V is also going to work. So there's a few options there, and we do need to be concerned of our layering here, which objects in front, which ones are back at a certain point. The other shortcut is the Alt key with our direct selection or V tool selected, and drag along. You should be able to see a little white arrow up here when you hold down Alt, and I'm going to create another duplicate there. Now you'll notice that these pink guides are showing up, and they are just over here in View and Smart Guides, or Control U to bring those up. Now, at a certain point, you may need to turn these off, and you'll notice when it happens because your objects will start snapping in places that you don't want them to, and we shall get to that shortly. All right, I'm going to select on these, and I'm going to change the colors of them. So I just want to have some varying colors for this. Go for blue for that one, and maybe go for, let's see, go for bright pink, and for this one here, I'm actually going to go and select a gradient just to make life a bit more interesting. We can go and change these at any point. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get T for text, and I'm going to create some text on top of these. So on this one, I'm going to write the word left, and let's scale that up and place. I'm going to duplicate that, again, holding down the Alt key, and move that across. Still click on this one, I'm going to change this to right. Click out of there, and duplicate again, and let's call this one top, like so. Then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to group these. So we've got text and box. I'm going to select through both of those, again, using my direct selection key, and I'm going to right click and click on group. I'll do the same with these two, and click group, and with the top and the far right square, right click and click on group. And if we look at our layers panel here, we'll see that these actually have put them into subgroups, which is extremely useful. We're going to have to use a lot of this when doing isometrics. Okay, so with these now selected, I can use my direct selection, and these will be moved around accordingly. And let's start turning them into isometric shapes. Now, to do this, we need to follow a series of commands. And once we've done this, you'll get the idea, but I'm also going to show you a shortcut technique for this. And Adobe XD keeps jumping at me, so turn them off again. Now, to do this, I've got selected on my left layer here, and I'm going to do some specific transformations. Now, in order to do these, I'm going to go to this tool here. It looks like a file tool at the moment, but could have scale. Shortcut is S to bring that up. And I want to go and make sure it's selected on the scale tool. Again, shortcut S. I'm then going to double click on this. It's going to bring up my scale option. I'm going to then click it to non-uniform. And horizontal, I'm going to leave it 100. And vertical, I'm going to make sure it says 86.6 So I've already done this one, so it's already put in here, but you may need to type that. It needs to be specifically 86.602%. And I'm going to hit OK. You can see it's kind of squashed it down there. That's fine. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to that same button that says Scale Tool. I'm going to switch that down to the Shear Tool and double click on that. And this is the left one, and I'll give you the PDF for this as well to follow along. I need to set the shear angle to -30%. Hit OK. And then finally, I'm going to go to the Rotate tool. Shortcut is R. Double click on that. And I'm going to set the rotate to -30 degrees and hit OK. Now that has now created the correct isometric perspective for the left panel. I'm going to do the same or slightly variants of that with the right one, so it's now selected. I'm going to go to my Scale tool, double click, and non-uniform, 86.602 yet again, great. Shear tool, double click. Instead of -30, I'm going to switch that over to 30 degrees, hit OK. And finally, rotate from -30, I'm going to set that to 30 and hit enter. Now we're starting to see how this is going to play out. Finally, I'm going to go to the top one, Scale tool, double click, non-uniform, 86.602, that sounds good. Shear tool, double click. This one here, angle 30 degrees, fantastic. And finally, rotate, double click. Rotate as -30 degrees and hit OK. Now I have done left, right, and top. I can grab these individually and we can start seeing that they can nice and easily join together. Once I have them in a location that I like placed together, I can select all of them, right click and go to group. And now I can move them around with ease. And the cool thing with this is I can duplicate and scale. And if I want to place this behind, I can right click and go arrange, send back or send backwards. And I can place my object behind. Oops. And again, we can grab the entire object to duplicate, place, and we can extremely well and very quickly populate in an area. And they're all going to fit in very nicely because they follow that same specific thing. So what I'm going to do is stop the video here, have a go at doing that, and I'm going to start up again and really get into a little bit more detail as far as setting up proper isometric grids and doing more complex